Hello, I am John Abbott, the producer and editor of A Nostalgic Oral History of Chalfont. Episode number 4 is entitled Bricks and Mortar. It takes you on a tour of Main Street using vintage movie films, photos, and stories going as far back as the 1920s.
And we proceeded with great care and respect for the, not only the building itself, but the building that is surrounded by a community that has a very deep and, how do you say, not only a deep, but the family roots here are still intact. So I think there's still probably a good number of third generation families living in this town, and I think that's extraordinarily compelling.
At one time, all of the mail came in and out of Chalfont on the railroad. There were certain trains that were mail trains, and they had a baggage car on it. And that's where the mail was delivered, and then the station master had to bring it up the hill or take it down the hill to be there when the train came.
That is, I remember it, that's right.
And
Yeah.
Jane, your father was the postmaster of Chalfont.
That's correct.
And we have a photo of dedicating the flagpole.
Yes.
And do you remember a story about his staff packing chickens?
Absolutely, from Kraut's Chicken Farm out on 202 before you get to County Line Road. They would bring the chicks in boxes, maybe 36 inches square, divided into 4 sections with 25 chicks in each section of the big box. He would process the boxes, how much it would cost to ship them, and then the station master, one of the Roy Ann's, would come up with a big wheelbarrow, load up about 4 boxes on the wheelbarrow, take them down the hill, stack them up, ready for when the next train came through. Yep.
Go ahead, you tell them.
Dr. Inches. I think his first name was Howard Inches. He was on Butler Avenue. I remember packing pills in bottles. He was like a so-called health doctor. Most of them were shipped out somewhere.
He used to go around and give lectures, and he had a 2 or 3 day lecture in Chalfont, and he had people come from all over the country. It was basically a mail order type of operation, and so there was not enough, the hotel wasn't taking overnight guests, so he went around town and asked people to take these people coming to his lecture in for those 2 or 3 days. And my mother and father did take in a lady. I have no idea where she was from anymore at that time. So he was apparently fairly well known throughout the country. I don't know how he got his business started, but as Gene said, most of his business was mail order.
lived in Chalfont for 35 years. Lived on North Main Street from 39 to 62. It was real small, maybe 4, 5, 6. The bank was robbed, and then they sent, I assume was the FBI, but I'm not sure, but sent the people into our house with violin cases, which of course I didn't know anything about. And they go upstairs and into my sister's bedroom, and they must have set up their guns on the windowsills out that window, because it looked right out that window to the front of the bank across the street. But as far as I know, nothing ever happened after that time when the bank was robbed. And that goes back quite a ways.
Okay, I'm Dolores Loss, and I've lived in Chalfont all my life. In fact, I was born here. There's a big joke in the family was I was born here and never got out, but I'm happy here, and I've had 88 years here, and it's a pretty great place to live.
And we moved to Chalfont when I was 5. Lived here ever since. There's no place like Chalfont as far as I'm concerned. Oh, at the mill they made hosiery stockings.
So silk stockings?
Silk stockings, right. And the girls that worked at the mill would come over to the Swartley Sweet Shop for lunch. Every day there would be at least a dozen women that came over and had lunch at our sweet shop, which 2 doors up there was a drugstore, and they had soda fountain, and they decided to sell the soda fountain. My mother bought all the equipment from them and opened the sweet shop in our house.
I think she paid something like $25 or $50 for everything that she needed to start the sweet shop from that.
It was basically ice cream, or
Ice cream, sandwiches. It was a place in town for the kids to go. There was no other soda fountain in town, so the kids would all congregate there.
They would have the jukebox and they'd play it all night till Mother would close around midnight, I guess.
Right, and during the war, we had to pull the curtains down so that there was no light
In an
show.
air raid.
And one time, my father was the air raid warden, and one time the curtains were not down far enough, and he saw the soda, he saw the jukebox, and he came in and almost shut us down because we were violating the no light provision in
They
town.
used to throw something over the jukebox,
Right,
like some coats or something of the kids. They'd throw it over to keep the light out, but I guess they didn't throw them over good enough that night. And
so,
so did the kids dance, or
oh yeah,
oh yeah,
what were the dances?
jitterbug. It was the jitterbug mostly.
So all the teenagers in town would come,
right. And
and your mother didn't mind?
Oh, she loved
she
it.
loved it. And Joe Halberg, Herman Halberg, you'll probably hear about him. He would come down and bring his dog, and that dog would sit out on the porch and wait for him until he decided to go home.
Right.
So what was the food? The ice cream floats, and ice cream cones, and
Ice cream sundaes, banana splits, milkshakes.
Another thing that I remember, and I was young, but when the war started and the boys started being drafted, every night before that boy was leaving for camp, I might get a little emotional, Mother would close the store at a certain time. she'd make a big spaghetti dinner for all the kids that were there for a send-off for those kids. And actually, because of the war is why she had to shut it down, because you just could not get, you couldn't get the supplies for it.
Where'd the ice cream come from?
Philly.
Philadelphia, it was Breyers, and they had gas rationing, and that's why they send it up on the train where Phil and I would go bring it home in the little red wagon.
And we all hated the job of being on duty during the dinner hour. In fact, you learned to eat your food really fast so that if you had to go wait on somebody while we were having dinner. Sundays were 10 cents. Banana splits were 20. So milkshakes were 15. And you could also get what was called a trip around the fountain, which it was a fountain, and they had different syrups, which you pushed the button and, you know, the syrup came out. So if they were real adventurous, they'd ask for a trip around the fountain, and that meant they would get a little bit of each of the different syrups. But it was not a very tasty drink, but some people liked it. Hamilton Street was really the industrial portion of Chalfont.
One street. Our industrial city.
Right. And
That was built by a man by the name of Leapfried, and he lived on Main Street. But that mill was built on Hamilton Avenue around there in the back, further back on the road, not up close to the street. And it started up, and he also employed people from around there. He started up shortly before the war, and then when the war came, both mills were really stressed because previous to the war, they made most of the stockings out of silk. And of course, silk coming into the country was down to nil, and most of the silk that was available was used in the war effort. So those mills were really stressed. The mill didn't last very long after that. And I think it was in the late 40s, maybe early 50s, very, very early 50s, that a company named Luxor bought the mill, and they started to make stainless steel home kitchenware utensils.
This was made at that manufacturing plant, and my mother gave that to me when I got married 68 years ago, and we still use it today.
it was the pit catcher lanes. That was on
202.
202. Bobby Shantz, my daughters, not all of them, three of our daughters worked for Bobby Shantz. And then there was Joe Astros, had the bowling alley. He used to live in Chalfont too. And that was a good place to go.
I've known Bobby personally since the mid-'80s until today. I knew him when they built the bowling alleys, the pit catcher with Joe Astroff in '79. So I started bowling leagues then and bowled there till about the mid to later '90s with a lot of different teams, and had a lot of fun there. I have no idea why he picked Chalfont. he lived in Ambler, and Joe Astroff lived in Chalfont. He lived down near Unami Junior or Unami Middle School, I guess it was then. I guess it's junior high now. But that might have been one reason with Joe Astroff living in Chalfont.
We had Weimer's store where Manhattan Bagel is now.
That was neat.
That was, then Bartleson's bought it. Weimer's store sold everything. It was sort of dark. Everything looked wooden. And, but they sold everything.
A man and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Weimer, worked in it.
Right.
And they had, Joe told me one time, the kids used to wear what they called galoshes instead of boots. And he would go upstairs in the Weimer store because that's where they had the galoshes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the knickers,
Yeah.
knicker pants. Well, they had that up at Moyer's store too.
So Bartleson's bought it from Weimer's.
Right.
Okay. How about Reese's Candy Shop? Remember that?
Oh, yeah. You could get ice cream, 25 cents. It
Like
was
a cone.
in a,
It was in a paper thing and you roll it and they push the ice cream out.
well, you could get a quart for 25
Oh, yeah.
cents.
Oh yeah, a cone would be like a nickel.
Right. And they made candy.
Well, I don't know anything about the bakery, but I do remember that was, when I was a kid, that was Reese's Candy. It was in there. The Reese family lived there, and they made candy. They made candy primarily around Christmas and Easter.
Halloween, they used to give out ice cream. And this one Halloween, Bibi and Audrey got dressed and they took me down and in our disguise and we got ice cream. We thought that was pretty good. So we went home and we quick changed into different clothes and went back down again. And I can remember her saying, I think you girls were here before.
Well, there's a lot of different people in there. There are Civil War soldiers in there. There's World War soldiers, 1 and 2, the Spanish-American War, and the Vietnam War, and I believe I found one from possibly Afghanistan. And there's people that were the movers and the shakers who were involved in land transfers and everything. And at that time of day, money was land. It wasn't accumulating, like we do today in banks. It was in the land that they owned.
He graduated from medical school in 1906, did an internship in Carlisle, and came to Chalfont in 1907. He was on 30 Main Street initially. Moved up the street, I don't know, late teens, early 20s to 130 Main Street. When he first moved to Chalfont, he was a horse and buggy doctor. In fact, I once had the insurance policy for his horse, and the horse's name was Maud. And I think the annual premium on Maud was 75 cents. If you look in his ledger, an office visit early on was 25 cents, and a visitation, he called it a visitation, was $1. He made house calls in any kind of weather, and the legendary story of my grandfather was at 76 years of age, he went out in the blizzard on the back of somebody's tractor to make a house call. I had all of his ledgers at one time. I've given a couple to my brothers and other people in the family. But in going through the ledgers, there's evidence that cash was always not coin of the realm. I noticed that he had a bushel of apples in payment one time, boxes of cigars, And I believe for a long time, at least when he had Maud, that he traded medical service for feed, hay, and possibly stable time for the horse that he used before he got a car. There were several instances of trade for service, though. He was still practicing in 1968 when he fell and broke his hip and died of systemic shock. He never closed the practice.
So was he a doctor and the Burgess of Chalfont at the same time?
He was, at least for 36 years worth of it. You figure he went from 1907 to 1968 as town doctor. Not the only one toward the end, but he still had a practice. People came in for the black pills.
When you went to see Dr. Burkhart, he had great big bottles of pills. And whenever he would put pills in like an envelope, and that's how you got your medication.
Everything you got those big black pills. I don't care what was wrong with you. You came out with a big black pill.
Welcome to my home. This is 145 North Main Street in Chalfont, Pennsylvania. This is the borough of Chalfont, a whole, 1.4 square miles, I think, maybe give or take. Anyway, I moved into this house in 1998. I bought the home from Andy Stoller and his wife. Andy was the mayor at one point of Chalfont, and to this day, when people ask me where I live and I tell them, they're like, oh, you live in Andy's house. Someday it'll be known as mine, but for now it's referred to as Andy's house. Anyway, the original owner who actually had this house built was Dr. Wesley Massinger, and he was the town vet. He had an architect, Oscar Martin, who's pretty well known both here and in Doylestown. And he did at one point have an animal hospital, but that seems to be the big mystery as to whether that hospital existed on this property before he had this house built or whether it was in a different location. That seems to be an unanswered question right now. But a lot of transformations happened over the years. It had been divided into an upstairs and a downstairs for two families to live here. And when Andy Stoller purchased the property, he took the original blueprints and with a lot of labor and a lot of love put this house back into its original single-family dwelling. The third floor, at one point, Andy told me that there was a cistern in a little depressed area on the third floor. You have to step down into it. And the story is told that during times of Prohibition, there were secret meetings up there. And there is a bar type area in that third floor space. And I don't know what exactly went on during that time, but it is known that they did have secret meetings up there, because that's the only way you could drink back then.
My name is John Hartzell. I'm an attorney in Doylestown, and I'm a relative of the founder of the Chalfont, of the Hartzell's Mill in Chalfont. The mill on Park Avenue was founded by my great-great-grandfather. In 1860, he bought that mill, having moved there from Montgomery County. Francis Dietz Hartzell, that's the F.D. Hartzell, Francis Dietz. He owned the mill, bought it in 1860, operated it very well for many years. Unfortunately, a fire burned down the mill in 1878 and it was rebuilt and continued thriving. F.D. Hartzell died in 1888 and the mill was turned over to two of his sons, B. Frank Hartzell and James Hartzell, who continued to run the mill well into the 1900s, and they turned it over then to B. Frank's two of his sons, Russell Hartzell, who was my grandfather, and his brother, Stuart Hartzell, who operated the mill until 1950 when Russell Hartzell passed away, and then Stuart Hartzell, the surviving brother, owner of the mill, sold his interest sometime in the 1950s. So it began with my great-great-grandfather, F.D. Hartzell, to my great-grandfather, B. Franklin Hartzell, then to my grandfather, Russell Hartzell, and then it was sold in the 1950s.